Hey everyone, today I've got a video showing you how I like to refinish dresser mirrors. I'm going to be using Dixie Belle chalk paint and brown wax today. My plan is to make something with a pop of color but still mute it so that it's not standing out too much. One of the first things I like to do is take the backing off of mirrors. This is actually easier to do than it looks. Not only is it faster than using painter's tape to mask off the mirror, but it also allows you to paint the back and the insides of the frame. If you don't paint the inside of the frame, you're able to see the original wood tone in the reflection of the mirror, and it usually looks pretty sloppy. I use a flathead screwdriver to pry the backing off of the mirror. Sometimes you'll have screws in the back and you can just use a drill. This one has staples, so I'm trying to pry them up. But sometimes these old backings will just kind of rip, so you have to be careful not to use too much force so that you don't break the backing and have to replace it later. With this one, the staples are actually staying in the wood. The backing is just so old that it just kind of rips out and comes right off. Another cool thing about taking the backing off is that you get to see the exact age of your piece. These little wooden wedges are what hold the mirror in. I usually just use a flathead screwdriver to pry them out. I've never really had an issue with breaking a mirror doing this before. Sometimes the edges might get a little nicked here and there, but nothing that's ever destroyed a whole mirror or anything. So I just work my way around the mirror, taking off the little wedges. I don't take all of them off. Usually you only need to take off like 2 or 3 and then slide the mirror out from the opposite side. These little staples sometimes get left behind, so you just kind of use the flathead in the same way to pry them out. I put the mirror on some sawhorses so I could get to this last wedge at the bottom. It seriously looks like I'm naked here, but I'm not. There we go. After that, the glass pretty much just slides on out. It's pretty heavy and the edges are really sharp, so you really need to be careful. But I just set it off to the side while I work on the frame. Anytime you're getting ready to paint something, it needs to be clean. Dixie Belle has this great white lightning cleaner. It's TSP. Just add a little bit of it to some warm water, mix it up. I wear a glove just because some people's hands might be sensitive. Other than that, it has no fumes or anything like that, and it's specifically meant for cleaning up projects prior to painting. It works really great too. You don't have to put too much elbow grease in. This piece has been sitting around for a while, so it's got a lot of dust, so I'm kind of scrubbing hard trying to get down in the crevices so I can get that dust out of there. You don't want that to interfere with your paint job. Dixie Belle doesn't require sanding when it comes to prep, but you do want to make sure that everything is free of any dirt and grime before you start painting. After that, you come back with a damp rag, everything gets another wipe down, and then it's pretty much ready for paint once that dries. I'm using some needle nose pliers to pull out the rest of the staples from the backing. I need all of this gone so that the backing will sit back on there smooth. Since I'm also going to be painting the back, I need all of these staples gone so that I can clean it down with white lightning like I did the front. The chalk paint I'm using for this project is Dixie Belle, and the color I chose was Dixie Belle Blue. This is a kind of a turquoise, but it's really bright, and I figured it'd be perfect whenever I got the brown wax on it. It would give it more of a deeper turquoise tone and work perfectly for what I'm trying to do for this piece. One thing I like about this paint is how well it covers. I was able to paint this piece in only 2 coats. Usually when I'm painting with a brush, I like to paint in several thin coats rather than doing thick coats. Dixie Belle tends to level pretty well, so I didn't have any problem with having obvious brush strokes or anything. I thought this piece would look good with some distressing to give it a little bit more depth, so I'm using 120 grit sandpaper to just lightly distress the edges. Dixie Belle is a chalk paint, so it distresses really easily. Rather than going along the lines, if you do a back and forth motion like I'm doing here, you get a lot more progress without wearing your arm out. When I'm edge distressing, I like to make my lines irregular rather than being just solid all the way across, and I think it gives it a lot of character. Dixie Belle also has their best dang wax in several different colors. I'm using brown on this project. You can see I've used it before. Applying wax is pretty much the same as you've seen in my other videos where I use wood stain for glazing. It's pretty much the same process. You're going to brush it on there and wipe it off. The only difference with this is that you wait about 10 or 15 minutes to kind of let it dry, and instead of wiping it, you're kind of more doing like a buffing action. You're not trying to rub it off, but you're just trying to buff it like you normally would any other wax, and it pretty much has the same effect with a lot less of the mess. This is also a really cool 2-in-1 deal where you don't have to wax before applying your colored wax with Dixie Belle. All you have to do is wait for the paint to dry, and then you can go ahead and start applying your wax and move on with your project. It looks pretty cool already, but once it gets all wiped off, it has a great glazing effect. Speaking of wiping it off, I forgot to record the majority of wiping the brown wax off with the front, but you can see it's really easy. I'm just using a buffing motion. I'm not using a whole lot of pressure. You're not really trying to wipe it off or anything. You just kind of want to buff back and forth, and it'll come off on the rag on its own. So I'm going to do the back side the same. I'm just brushing the wax on and letting it dry for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'll come back with the rag and buff it off. Now that the frame is done, I'm going to take the time to clean this mirror off before I get it in the frame, so I can avoid using any chemicals and getting it directly on the paint since it's newly painted. Take the mirror to the side and get it out of the way, but go back that way with it. Bring the mirror frame back, and then the mirror will go back in the same way it came out. I just slide it into the wedges that I left in, and then let it set into the frame where it was before when I took it out. Now that the mirror is back in place, I can start putting the wedges back in with a staple gun. It isn't always necessary to put the exact wedges in the same spaces that they were before. The important thing at this point is to make sure that the wedges take up enough space so that the mirror doesn't move around. You can see that I'm moving the wedges around to make sure that everything is nice and tight before I start putting the staples in to secure everything. To secure the wedges, I'm driving 2 staples in at an angle so that it goes into the wood, and then making sure that everything is nice and tight. If for some reason your wedges get broken when you're taking them out, you can use cardboard folded up and staple it in the same way and get the same effect. I thought it was kind of neat that this furniture was made in May of 1969, 50 years before I got a hold of it. So I figured I'd sign my name in here and maybe someone will see it again someday. Pretty much all there is left to do now is to put the backing back on. The first thing I put back on are the D-rings so that everything is aligned. I'm not trying to put the staples back in the same place, but I want to make sure that the backing looks as original as possible and looks nice and neat. So putting these screws in first makes sure that I don't have to create any new holes in the back. Once these are in, I'll use my staple gun to put in about 6 or 8 staples. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, okay, 12, more than 8, 13, 14, 15, 16 staples. The point is to make sure that everything is nice and secure so that when you flip it over, things don't fall apart. Now that everything's done, I just give it one last wipe down to make sure there's no more smudge marks, and there's still smudge marks. But I hope y'all liked how everything turned out. I like it. This project only took me about an hour and a half, and it was really easy to do. I really appreciate you watching. Leave me a comment down in the bottom. Make sure to like my video, show your support, subscribe if you haven't already. If you have subscribed, hit the bell so you can get the notifications. I've got more videos coming up in the next week or so. I'll be doing some videos at estate sales, so if you haven't subscribed, you're going to miss it. I'll talk to y'all later.